The vote, not credits, not even abstention. And he could have said they could have abstained, but no, they had to vote for. So that completely floored him. And then he had another thing to take up, because the local authorities said, who is this suspicious character hanging around the village? He knows Russian, he's got French money, he's got a Russian passport, he's probably taking photographs, he seems to walk around the hills a lot, so he's probably a spy. So they put him in jail, the locals, where he stayed for about 10 days, 8th August to 19th August. And one of the reasons he managed to get out was, as opposed to when he was in jail in 1994, 20 years earlier, he now had powerful friends in high places, namely Viktor Adler, the Austrian Social Democrat leader who went to the Austrian Minister of the Interior and said, this Lenin guy is one of the biggest opponents of Tsar and whom you were fighting, let him out. And the Tsar said, are you the minister after? Are you sure he's an enemy of the Tsar? And Adler answered, he's a more implacable enemy than your excellency. So, true enough. And then, so he was released. He got on a train on the 16th, but before he got on the train, to move out, he had to move to a neutral country, Switzerland. Before he got out, he got another shock, which was that in France, a leaflet had been issued entitled "The Declaration of Russian Socialists Joining the French Army as Volunteers." So here, immigrant Russian social democratic activists joining the army, including some Bolsheviks. So some Bolsheviks were actually so swept up in the war fever that they were joining the army in France. So he got on the train, and there's some personal problems. His mother-in-law was dying, and I just want to sort of emphasize how tough these first couple of weeks are. He arrives in Bern on the 5th September, so it's been about 6 weeks, less than that, before the outbreak of war. He literally steps off the train, goes to a meeting with the local Bolsheviks, and presents the principles of his program for the next 2 or 3 years. So either he managed to sort of superhuman feat of rethinking, or he sort of knew what he was doing. I mean, he didn't have to rethink. And what I'm trying to get with all the dates and things is to suggest the second one. But actually, the shocks weren't over. There was one shock yet to come, which was in some ways the greatest shock of all. I think the one that was most disorienting and emotionally upsetting. This was the fact that Karl Kautsky, his mentor and person he had sort of unreservedly admired as a writer, not particularly as a person, but as a writer, was now writing articles that wibbled and wobbled and wavered and did not live up to what he thought that Kautsky should be saying. So he was devastated by this. If you read some of what he wrote in September 1915, before these articles came out, he doesn't mention Kautsky, but he does say about he says, the danger of opportunism has long been indicated by the finest representatives of the revolutionary proletariat of all countries. And it's pretty clear he means Kautsky and Luxembourg mainly, finest representatives. So here's one of the two finest representatives writing these, essentially justifying what the Reichstag did. So a famous account in his letter to one of his comrades says, we discussed it earlier, I hate more than anybody else this dirty, vile, smug, self-satisfied hypocrisy of Kautsky. I may have left out a term or two. So pretty strong, as I say, more emotional than, very emotional. But there was another letter to the same addressee a week later that has a quote that we don't read so much, and that's the title of my, what that includes the line that's in my title, which was where Lenin said, to his Shopnikov, obtain without fail and reread Kautsky's Road to Power. And see what he says there about the tasks of our time. And now he plays the toady and disavows all that. Okay, so the reason he's so angry, the reason he's so emotionally upset, is precisely because he feels that this book and Kautsky in general had been giving the most the greatest sense of the task of the times. I'm going to take that very literally because and examine it. What did he mean? What was in this book and Kautsky's writings, especially, that made him say this is the task of the times, meaning not yesterday, today, in the near future. So we can suggest that there be two ways of looking at it. The traditional way on the left is that the shock of the Reichstag and the other ones that are not mentioned, but other shocks, led Lenin to a process of rethinking Marxism, where he realized the basic fallacious nature of the Second International Marxism and returned to the roots or came up with new theories or whatever. And there are various, various ways that this happened. One popular story is that he read Hegel and discovered the real dialectic and replied that, I mean, he did read Hegel, but that wasn't the cause of his political platform. And other ones is that, for example, some people say that Bukharin was a big influence on him, etc. So that's one. There are various ways of saying it. I call that the rethinking way of looking at it. I have my term for what I think is happening is aggressive unoriginality. Okay, where do I come up with that term? Because if you read Lenin's writings in this period, 1914, 1916, he himself sort of grabs you by the throat and says, I'm not original, right? I'm just saying what everybody else is saying. And everybody else said, this is the educated consensus, all educated Marxists were saying this, and they're betraying it, and I'm not saying a damn thing is ideological. I mean, it's original. So I sort of feel like backing off, you know, okay with it, okay, you're not saying anything original. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to sort of try to see if that rhetoric, it could be just rhetoric, but it could be express what's going on. And this will also lead us, I think, into first a definition of his platform, his outlook, his definition of the situation in these years, and secondly, a stronger look about where he got them and what the ideological background and the context of those are. So in this talk, I'm going to be discussing only the years 1914, 1916, and I call those the left Zimmerwald years. Just to remind you what left Zimmerwald was, it was, well, Zimmerwald is a little village outside Bern, I think, where a conference was held in August, September maybe, 1915, of various representatives of all the countries, an international sort of movement of people who wanted peace or who wanted to fight the war. And Left Zimmerwald became the name of the faction that Lenin led within that movement, which was more revolutionary, wanted to more defeatist and these various things, but much more radical. They were not pacifist like many of the others were. So Left Zimmerwald is the name of sort of Lenin's tendency during those years, and also remarks the first time that Lenin was a leader on the European scale, that he staked out a leadership claim. It was a very small group during these years, but one that was seen and known and so forth. Let's see if I got all my quotes here. At one point, I can't find this quote. So, at one point, Lenin says, all we left Zimmerwaldians say what Kautsky was saying before 1914, namely that a war was war was coming, revolution will come out of war, and we'll be facing a new revolutionary situation. So, again, that's an example of what I call the aggressive unoriginality. He's insisting on the fact that his left of Zimmerwald has the strongest connections with Kautsky ahead of time. Okay, so let me say just a word to help you put in context things about this book, Road to Power. You can see it's not a long book. It's a pamphlet, really. It's about 80 pages, 90 pages. And it came out in 1909. And it's the end part of a development that began in 1902 with his other sort of book of similar size called The Social Revolution. This is both these books are trying to say, as against the revisionists and the opportunists, that not only is revolution necessary, but it's becoming more necessary, that the contradictions are sharpening, that, and furthermore, we're getting closer and closer to a revolutionary era. And actually, the private experience of Kautsky in publishing this book should have told him that, in fact, it did tell him that there was something wrong with the party, because the party authorities said, we're not going to publish it under our thing because, well, their excuse was the prosecutor might get us for high treason, which, you know, I mean, was not made out of thin air, but was fairly thin air. And so Kautsky had to sort of put on a little backstage fight to get it officially published by the party, and had to. The compromise was that they would put out a second edition in which he changed a word or two. Didn't change anything important. But so almost before it was published in Germany under party auspices, it was already being translated and published elsewhere, including Russia. Lenin, oddly enough, there's no record of him commenting on it until 1914, when he started making these pleas. And he took his own advice to Shlapnikov. Remember, he said, "Name without fail and reread." So I think he did reread it. He sat down and he flipped through the pages, and he wrote an article, which I have put in a handout. I don't think there's any left, in which he just literally goes. I mean, I found the page number for each quotation that he gives, and they're all in order. So he was just going flip, 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 flip. Look what he said here. Look what he said here. Look what he said here. All through the book, and he just. So he began by saying, "For decades, German social democracy was a model to the social democrats of Russia, even somewhat more than to the social democrats of the whole world." True enough. It is therefore clear that there could be no intelligent attitude toward the new socialist chauvinism without a precise definition of one's attitude toward German social democracy. What was it in the past? What is it today? What will be in the future? A reply to the first of these questions can be found in Der Weg zur Macht, The Road to Power. Okay, so a pamphlet written by K. Kautsky in 1909, translated into many European languages, and that's not trivial, that little description, because he wants to say this is an important or authoritative Second International work. Containing a most complete exposition of the tasks of our times. I'm going to go through this in some detail. This will be all the more useful since now these forgotten ideals are so barefacedly cast aside. And he goes through, and he ends up by saying, this was German social democracy at its finest. This is the social democracy that had promise. This is the German social democracy that one must and can and must respect. So I'm just trying to get across how strong was his indication that this was the good social democracy, that this was the high point, and that it was still valid. And just to answer a question that might arise, he didn't change his attitude on this. He kept repeating the same things throughout until I think the last reference is in 1918 or 1919. And in State Revolution, he criticizes the book because it doesn't, he says, it doesn't talk about the state, but he still says that it's the best of Kautsky's books, and that he doesn't say he disagrees with anything. He does say it's just the absence on this question. But he still agrees that it was about the arguments it did make. Okay, so I'm going to, just to get us in the string of things here, I'm going to just do a little summary. This summary had just a paragraph here I wrote at one point, and of the main overall argument in this book. And I'm only using quotes that Lenin actually quoted himself in this in his thing. So this is sort of Lenin's summary, in a sense. So this is my version of Kautsky's argument. We are entering a new age of revolutions, quote unquote. And particularly, quote, a world war is obviously imminent, and war also means revolution, unquote. This revolutionary situation will lead to an acceleration of social polarization since, quote, the rate of the advance becomes very rapid as soon as the time of revolutionary ferment comes, unquote. For one thing, petty bourgeois elements such as the peasantry are capable of going over to our side en masse during a crisis, because they will be fed up with the elite. Western Europe, in particular, is ripe for socialism. Therefore, the proletariat, quote, can no longer speak of a premature revolution, unquote. In fact, the long-awaited dictatorship of the proletariat is a real possibility in the near future. The duty of the Socialist Party is therefore to remain, quote, unshakable, consistent, and irreconcilable. And that's the quote where I've used Lenin and Lenin's article. And I should also mention that there is I'll be talking about this later, a scenario of global revolution in this book that was picked up and used by Lenin. Okay, so I'm going to now go try to explain what this definition of the situation is. I've put the historical situation now. What was it that he got from the book? And I'm going to go in a good dialectical fashion. I'm going to go abstract to concrete. Okay? And the most abstract thing here that we want to do is the idea of a revolutionary situation. Just the whole idea of it, just the concept of a revolutionary situation. So that's not, might be interesting to argue whether that comes from Marxism or is it inherent in Marxism or not. But the idea is that we alternate between periods that are peaceful development and periods that are revolutionary situations, and that they're completely, well, as Lenin said, a phase that is utterly dissimilar to the previous peaceful gradual development. So we're in a two-phase development, back and forth, peaceful situations and revolutionary situations, and they're different in their logic and their everything about them, and including their tactics and their situation. And one feature of this is the tempo of development. So I'm going to read what Kautsky said about the revolutionary time of revolutionary ferment. And I think this is the kind of quotation that we don't usually see with Kautsky, but it helps explain why Lenin and many other revolutionaries admired Kautsky. When times of revolutionary ferment come, the tempo of progress all at once becomes rapid. It is quite incredible how swiftly the masses of the population learn in such times and achieve clarity about their class interests. Not only their courage and their desire to fight, but also their political interest is spurred on by the most powerful way by the consciousness that the moment has arrived for them to rise by their efforts out of the darkest night into the bright glory of the sun. Even the most sluggish become industrious. Even the most cowardly bold. Even the most intellectually limited acquire a wider mental grasp. In such times, political education of the masses takes place in years that would otherwise require generations. And this idea that during a revolution you learn more in 5 months than in 50 years of peaceful development, Lenin says this many times. Okay, so that's one thing about a revolutionary situation. I think, by the way, if I were to go into where the idea of a revolutionary situation comes from, it comes from the idea that, the Marxist idea that there's objective forces that prepare the way for the revolution. So the revolutionary situation is not created by the party. The party is revolutionary, but the revolutionary situation is created by objective forces, and you just have to be ready. And therefore you need two new tactics. And Kautsky, in this point, was arguing with Rosa Luxemburg in a famous polemic, but the basic idea of what Kautsky was saying in that polemic is mass strike is okay for a revolutionary situation. We're going to be in a revolutionary situation soon, but we're not now, so let's not use the mass strike now. I'm not going to evaluate the argument. I'm just going to say how it works with the idea of being in a revolutionary situation, making a different context, different thing. Okay, so that's the most abstract. Next, we're going to go to a fairly abstract set of conditions, necessary and sufficient conditions for what a revolution, how you recognize one, right? So there's a fairly well-known Lenin one, but what's interesting is that it bears a very strong resemblance to the one presented in Kautsky's, this one. Kautsky offers 4 conditions A regime hostile to the people, a party of irreconcilable opposition with organized masses, mass support given to the party, and a regime crisis of confidence. Lenin's own definition is essentially in 4 parts. And when he gave his own definition, he commented, and this is, again, the aggressive unoriginality rhetoric, such are the Marxist views on revolution, views that have been developed many, many times, have been accepted indisputably by all Marxists, and for us, Russians, were corroborated in a particularly striking fashion by the experience in 1905. So again, he's disclaiming any originality. So there's the next thing about the features. Okay, somewhat more concretely, Kautsky, I think, was the first one. I'm not sure if he was the first one, but in any event, it's in there, of having the idea of moving into 3 periods, 3 big basic periods. Period 1 up to 1871, a very basically revolutionary period. Period 2, 1871 to circa 1905, basically a peaceful period. And 1905 onward, a new era of revolutions and of unrest and of accelerated revolutionary development. And Lenin adopted this idea, and it's part of his explanation for what happened to the Second International, that during the time of peace it degenerated. Okay, that's another feature. So now I'm going to have, so the next, now I'm going to get more concrete and talk about what Kautsky said and Lenin picked up on, what the revolutionary situation that was coming to Europe was going to look like. So now we're really we're not talking about abstract definitions or wide historical frameworks, we're talking about Europe, the European situation in these years. Okay, at home, in Western Europe, in general, growing contradictions and the sharpening of class contradictions, not the softening, as the Bernstein people said, but the sharpening of class contradictions is going on, and also the groundwork, the framework, the prerequisites of socialism are in place. Therefore, it's impossible to speak of a premature revolution. And at one point, got a lot of quotes here. At one point, it's on page 8. One point Lenin said about this, quote, "There is no need for us to prove that the objective conditions in Western Europe are ripe for socialist revolution. This was admitted before the war by all influential socialists in all advanced countries." So that quote brings out 2 things. First of all, while Kautsky is the main guy, Lenin is also saying all influential socialists in all advanced countries. Secondly, there is no need for us to prove. I think that shows the rhetorical use of this aggressive unoriginality. He's saying, not Lenin, not just some Radagalinsky from Russia is telling you this. This is the informed consensus of the experts, and so you better believe it. And we all argue like that, don't we? So saying not only me, but the experts say this, and so he had rhetorical reasons for doing this. That's very clear. Okay, so that's at home. We're moving. By the way, did I say that Kautsky had been? Kautsky himself said there's nothing new in this book. It's a summation of what he'd been arguing for the last 7 or 8 years. Okay, next is what abroad is what I call the global interactive revolutionary scenario, or global revolutionary interactive scenario, or something. The idea is, this is a part of Kautsky that I think has been unexplored. It's, I haven't fully explored it. I'm just sort of looking at what I see here. But there's a lot of articles, they're in out-of-the-way places. For example, I found a couple of Kautsky articles in the book over there, the Revolutionary History book on Balkan socialists, and there was 2 articles by Kautsky on events in the Balkans. So he just wrote about everything, and he was particularly involved with colonial policy, as has been mentioned earlier. You know, one of the first arguments with Bernstein was the first attack on Bernstein that led to the famous reparations debate in the 1890s was over colonial policy. That was the setting off issue, because Bernstein was sort of for ethical colonialism, sort of for for nice colonialism. And a lot of articles, including on Russia, as I've said before, was a particular interest and knowledgeable about. Okay, so the Bolsheviks were picking up on this global scenario even before the outbreak of war. There are articles by Lenin and Kamenev and no doubt others. Okay, what are the features that are in this? Well, first, just a general over the interactive formula, which Kautsky I call it the interactive formula because I find it, he repeated it several times. It basically is events in one country have to be taken into the larger context, and people are the events in one country are strongly influenced by other countries. So he repeats that sort of we have to understand and know this by this point. And so what does he mean by that? So, I mean, how does he fill that picture out? First, there are all sorts of linkages between the class struggles in any one country and other countries. The linkages are in the nature of, for example, people can read and know about them. This is particularly clear, say, in Russia, where everybody's actions are influenced by what they've seen in Western Europe and the forms of struggle that were developed there. But it's all over the place. Any class struggle today will not be the same as any class struggles earlier, because people can read and are influenced by this. Secondly, there's a new, for example, bourgeois revolutions can't be the same because there's a new need to fight external domination, which wasn't in the old revolutions. Third, there's a possibility of what I might call syncopated development, i.e. countries can, backwardness can be an advantage because you can move faster. And one example he gives of this is Japan, which he said was able to jump over feudalism, or not jump over, but get rid of it in an accelerated fashion. And of course, Russia. And with Russia, Russia plays, in this interactive formulas, Russia plays a big role, because it was an accepted idea that Russia's democratic revolution might very well spark off a socialist revolution in Europe. And this was a generally accepted idea. But then what Kautsky also says is that if that happens, democratic revolution here, socialist revolution here, it very well might have accelerated faster development in Russia, because it's backward and can, in the context of a socialist Europe, might go faster than the more hidebound Western countries. And then finally, he talks a great deal about nationalist revolutions, and he wants to make clear that these are China, Turkey, Russia, and these are new development that's going to upset things. And he says he insisted these are not nice people. I mean, they're the Kuomintang. Was the Kuomintang yet? Anyway, the Sun Yat-sen people. They imprison national socialists. The Japanese, crush the workers, etc. That does not in any way alter the fact that they are weakening European capitalism and its governments, and introducing an element of political unrest into the whole world. So he sort of cheers on these guys, two cheers for them, because they are fighting against oppression, i.e. national domination by other countries, and they are also making life tough for the Europeans. So I'll sum up this side of it with a couple of good quotes. One is when he's talking to people like Bernstein, socialist ethical colonialists. He says the colonial policy is based on the idea that only Europeans are capable of independent development. The men of other races are considered children, idiots, or beasts of burden. And even socialists proceed on this assumption as soon as they want to pursue a policy of colonial expansion, an ethical one, of course. But I like this next little thing. But reality soon teaches them that our party's tenet that all men are equal is no mere figure of speech, but a very real force. So speaking in back then, he's saying, you know, Europe, your days of just running the world are over. People are capable and are doing it, of fighting back. And then right on the last page of this, he says, when Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, they regarded only Western Europe as the field of battle of the Proletarian Revolution. Today, it has become the whole world. Today, the battles in the liberation struggle of laboring and exploited humanity are being fought not only on the Spree River and the Seine, but also at the Hudson and the Mississippi, at the Neva and the Dardanelles, at the Ganges and the Hoang Ho. And I call attention to the Neva, the Russian river in Pittsburgh. So he was including the Russian Revolution in this global unrest. Okay, so now we're going to move on to even more specifically what was going to set off this new era of revolutions in particular, and I want to take up the subject of imperialism, war, and revolution. And therefore I'm going to have to correct a misimpression that was left by John's comments the other day. He quoted the super-imperialism and said that, and implied that Kautsky was arguing with his theory that the war probably wouldn't break out or something like this. No, that's not quite correct, because for two reasons. First, the important thing here is that this theory of Kautsky's super-imperialism is a new theory that is consciously and explicitly going away from what Kautsky had been saying himself earlier. I think the argument, well, that's the first thing. So it's Kautsky who's rethinking here. Kautsky is sort of exploring a new thing, and Lenin who's insisting on the old orthodoxy. And this is very clear. I have a book that was written in 1915, where the author, American author, surveying socialism in the war, says, and Kautsky used to say this, he's now moved on, he's got this other theory, but if you want to know what people were really saying, including himself earlier, and he quotes a writer, Morris Oquit. So, when Lenin says, I'm getting from Kautsky my definition of situation, he also means imperialism, and he's infuriated at the super-imperialism, or supra, or ultra, that's right. Ultra-imperialism is a new theory. And the second thing about that is, he wasn't quite saying ultra-imperialism is happening, that it's going on right now, it's descriptive. He said it's a possibility, and a strong one, because in the long run, these guys will figure out, but why are we shooting each other? Let's get together and exploit everybody, as a team. So it wasn't a prophecy exactly, but it was a future possibility, and it was exactly on this implication that Lenin was so furious. He said, if you say that ultra-imperialism, if you say with your crummy theory that peace is a possibility, even with imperialism, you're letting down the side, you're weakening people's will, and it's untrue anyway, and so forth. So I don't want to get into that debate, which is, I'm sort of sometimes rather vague myself about what Kautsky was saying after 1914. And I want to go back to what Kautsky was saying earlier, which is what's important for us in our topic. Okay, so we find in Kautsky just the following ideas. I haven't made a full study, but I found the following. First, just a striking phrase, imperialism is the last refuge of capitalism. That's the phrase. And what he meant by that was that it's, well, he meant that first of all, people are getting desperate. They see capitalism as a blind alley, but there's one possible great inspiring idea, imperialism, where the country is going to go forth and make its place in the world and bring benefits to mankind and do well for itself. But he says this is obviously when this idea is exploded, that's it. Then he also says that the world is being completely divided up. For example, China, China used to be divided up. There's nowhere more to go. China himself is rebelling and refusing to put up with it. So imperialism has reached its limits in this respect. It's divided up the world. Secondly, imperialism is leading to war. The expression he uses is that we're getting to a situation, even though the ruling classes are afraid of war because they're afraid of revolution, the guns will fire of themselves. And another idea, which comes up to the bourgeois labor party that we were discussing the other day, is he says at length that England has avoided social revolution because of the profits brought by India. Now, he doesn't say, as far as I can see, about the labor aristocracy, although I think he says that elsewhere about the labor aristocracy. But what he's saying here is just that England is exploiting India. It's got enough money to make concessions. So he says if India rebels, that'll be a crisis for England, just for that very reason. And he says, he basically says, if the English workers don't rebel even after India has cut itself free, I don't know what to do. I don't know. They're hopeless. But I'm not going to try to evaluate. He was saying these ideas earlier, like in 1904 or 5, maybe earlier. I'm not going to evaluate these ideas. I just want to say that Lenin's argument about imperialism as a cause of as a reason for why the revolution hasn't broken out yet is not particularly new, and also it's obviously kind of both Kautsky and Lenin are trying to sort of limit the damage. They're both trying to come up with a reason why the English workers or workers in are not having a revolution. Okay, so to sum up all of what I've said, about the class contradictions at home, class contradictions in national, other kinds of contradictions abroad, the war revolution coming up. The sum up prediction is that there's a period of upheaval and unrest coming up, and it will probably end with the dictatorship of the proletariat in Europe. Okay. Yes, here's his words, and this is back in 1904, he's saying this, or 5. What it promises to inaugurate, I think he's talking about the Russian Revolution here, is rather an era of European revolutions that will end with the dictatorship of the proletariat, paving the way for the establishment of a socialist society. So, okay, so, these themes that I've been remarking are, the reason I've emphasized them is that Lenin emphasizes them. That's what he gets from them, and that's what he says many times over. But now I'm going to go on to the tactical conclusions, tactical main paths. And on the main path of the tactical reaction to this new revolutionary situation, the two main things that Lenin has are also contained here, if somewhat more ambiguously. The two main tactics that I mean, the ones that he is already going for him in September 1914, is turn the imperialist war into a civil war. Not that exact wording, I think, but the idea, and get rid of the opportunism in the new international and in national parties. Okay, so let's look at those. And for the turn the imperialist war into the civil war, I'll bring your attention to something that was very important for Lenin and to which he referred many times. It's the Basel Manifesto of 1912, which was the last of a series of 2 or 3 manifestos at Socialist International Congresses. This was a special Congress called because of a diplomatic crisis. But the Basel Manifesto was very important for Lenin. He refers to it many times. And the reason is, I think he says, this was a solemn document, you guys all signed it, and you're not living up to it. And so I've got to find which of these various pieces of paper has it. It's on page 9. What the Basel Manifesto said was that there's war, the socialists have a responsibility. Here it is. The representatives in the Basel International Congress, the European Social Democrats repeated their 1907 resolve to, quote, use the economic and political crisis created by the war to rouse the masses and thereby hasten the downfall of capitalist class rule. Now, it's a little more evasive than Lenin probably realized. Notice it says, use the crisis to rouse the masses and thereby hasten the downfall of capitalist caste rule. But, I mean, anything you do class struggle-wise is going to hasten the downfall. So, but what he understood it to mean, and what certainly it sounds like it means, is the parties were under solemn obligation of their own manifesto to turn the imperialist war into a civil war. That is to say, to turn this unjust war into a revolution. And so he insists very much that that this was solemn binding obligation. Kautsky signed it too, or I don't know if he signed it individually or as a member of the party. And furthermore, that the Basel Manifesto was squarely and centrally in the socialist tradition. So here's another little piece of progressive unoriginal rhetoric. For Lenin, I'm quoting his words, it's a summary of millions of proclamations, newspaper articles, books, speeches of the socialists of all countries from the entire epoch of the Social International. To brush aside the Basel Manifesto means to brush aside the whole history of socialism. So, and he thought they were brushing aside, so the conclusion is that they were traitors. So that leads to the next big big tactical direction, which is get rid of opportunism. So one of the things that he meant to, what he wanted to do with get rid of optimism was to get rid of Kautsky. So it's very ironic that as when he does so, he practically quotes Kautsky to explain his reasoning. First of all, there's the very concept of opportunism, and he gives Kautsky full credit for developing that concept and fighting it. He's even in 1920, he's still saying, and Karl Kautsky, who did yeoman work in helping us fight opportunism, which he now is one too bad. Secondly, Lenin instantly said the new social chauvinism, i.e. defense of people defending their own country, the new social patriotism is the old opportunism reborn. It's just the new latest development. And by the way, empirically, there was problems with that assertion because many of the people who were the most rabid social patriots had been on the left in France and in Germany and even in Russia. So, but he was aware of that, but he said, nah, those are exceptions. So Lenin is saying he understands what's going on in the 1914, the social chauvinism, the social patriotism that so shocked him, in terms of how he understood he and Kautsky understood the old Second International as opportunism versus orthodoxy. Okay, and next, following from that, the need to split if things got too bad. And here, what is amazing is that he quotes Kautsky. He says, as Kautsky said once, Kautsky said he'd split if an opportunism became a tendency, it became a sort of, not just a mood or a danger or something, but a tendency, or if it tried to take over. So, and then this really amazed me when I came across it. He said, and Kautsky once said, why don't we change the name from social democratic to communist? Well, that's a good idea, let's do it. And of course Kautsky, it's only words for Kautsky, but we'll do it. So the whole, the sort of, Kautsky never called for a third international. He wouldn't want it. We know he wouldn't want it. But the ideas that John Lenin used to justify it, the first thing that came to his mind, these are 1914, 15, were things he got from Kautsky. Kind of amazing. Okay. So I think what I've tried to say is that for Lenin in the years 1914, 1916, he operated with the idea of a revolutionary situation that had a certain set of features that required new tactics, that was based on a new situation of global unrest, and he got his understanding of these and his assurance that it was the truth from the old international and primarily Kautsky. We pointed out that he has rhetorical reasons for making this kind of argument and making this kind of assumption. If he just said, if he had rethought Marxism, if he went and said to everybody, I have a new Marxism that no one's and I want to say that the people for the last 30 years have misunderstood Marx, follow me, he wasn't going to get very far. So, but he didn't. He went and said, I'm the one who's standing up for what all the other people have neglected to do. Now, so he might be right, he might be wrong. Again, I'm saying I'm giving you Lenin's view of the situation. I happen to think he was right. I happen to think he did get those ideas from them, or rather, he shared them. I don't, you know, I'm not saying he wouldn't have occurred to him independently. But even if he was wrong, even if it's rhetorical, even if he didn't really mean it, all these things, we should definitely be aware of the fact that he is saying this, and take very seriously when he says that he's Kautsky, in this book in particular, is the most precise definition of the tasks of our times. So now I've emphasized unoriginality so much, so you're going to say, well, what's going on here? Because Lenin was sort of the alone and isolated and fighting and heroically sort of standing there saying, you're all wrong. Well, two things. First, I think he got the assurance to be alone from just exactly what I was saying. You know, I mean, I'll finish in 2 seconds here, but for 5 minutes. Yeah. He had the assurance to do this because he felt himself on such strong ground. And secondly, what he thought he had to do was do what Kautsky and others were failing to do, namely work out the tactics. I mean, I said the main tactical directions, but that's just a very broad definition. So the job of a political leader, in Lenin's mind, was to take the broad definition of the situation and work out tactics that are true to the principles, but apply to the situation. I think that's what he meant primarily when he talked about dialectics. And he said Kautsky taught us. He says at one point, Kautsky taught us dialectics, but he completely failed us when it came to this situation. He just didn't work. He didn't work out the tactics. He didn't do it. So he doesn't say this, Lenin, but the implication is, so I have to do it. And so what happened in 1914, the shocks, was what had led to a new Lenin. I think it did lead to a new Lenin. There's a Lenin who put himself on on a European scale. He's now thinking in terms of being a European leader with a European program, European platform. And to overstate it, but to say it in a snazzy way here, is that Lenin had to become Kautsky because Kautsky was indeed Kautsky. So,